Hello, and welcome to another episode of Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. If this is your first time tuning in, we're really glad that you're here. This podcast is a space where we explore what it means to build strong, thoughtful communities grounded in our local lives, but enriched by the diverse connections, the energy, and perspectives we gather from around the world. As the name suggests, the Informed Perspective is built on the belief that meaningful change begins by listening, really listening to different voices, lived experiences, and perspectives that might challenge or expand our own. Each episode takes a closer look at individual stories that spark reflection and help us rethink how we understand community, purpose, and impact. Today's special episode is on education strategy, a crucial conversation at a time when education systems worldwide face immense pressure and rapid transformation. We're living through an era where education is being challenged, redefined, and reshaped all at once. In some parts of the world, education is still a luxury, access limited by poverty, conflict, migration, or deep-rooted inequalities. In others, schools are struggling to keep students engaged within systems that often feel outdated, underfunded, or overstretched. Meanwhile, global challenges are reshaping what education needs to deliver. Technology and AI are transforming jobs and how we learn. The digital divide is leaving millions behind. Mental health crises are growing, especially among young people, and traditional subjects and systems no longer seem to prepare students for an uncertain and complex future. Schools today are expected to do more than teach. They're support centres, safe havens, social spaces, and often lifelines. Yet many operate with outdated infrastructure, overworked staff, and constant pressure from budget cuts, league tables, or corporate demands. So, what is the true purpose of education today? What should we be teaching and how? How do we create strategies that work locally and globally in both high and low resource settings? How do we prepare students for a world we can't yet fully imagine, a world of AI, climate disruption, and evolving careers? How can we ensure inclusivity in education? And crucially, how do we support the people at the heart of education, the teachers, the support staff, and communities who make learning possible? Because it can't wait. Children matter right here and right now. If schools want to truly thrive, not just scrape by, they have to look beyond simple access and attendance. Foundational skills like literacy and numeracy, absolutely non-negotiable. Yet even in some of the world's wealthiest countries, those basics are starting to slip. Technology is definitely shaking things up in the classroom, with more and more schools turning to digital tools to boost student engagement, something that's becoming almost unavoidable in our dopamine-driven instant gratification world. And yet the digital divide remains wide. While some students are exploring VR experiences and gamified learning platforms, others in different parts of the world are still struggling with something as basic as a stable internet connection. However, the biggest challenge isn't just tech, it's people. UNESCO predicts a staggering shortage of 44 million primary and secondary teachers by 2030. Without enough skilled educators, even the best technology won't prepare students for what lies ahead. So in this episode, we're digging into some of the big forces reshaping education today, from tech to teaching, access to equity, because education isn't just about grades or curriculum, it's the foundation of all of our futures. So before we dive into our guest introductions today, I would like to add a few quotes to give us a bit of perspective maybe, or different perspectives on this subject. Doris Lessing, the novelist and poet, in The Golden Notebook wrote, "Ideally, what should be said to every child repeatedly throughout his or her school life is something like this. You are in the process of being indoctrinated. We have not yet evolved a system of education that is not a system of indoctrination. We are sorry, but it is the best we can do." C.S. Lewis, "The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts." And attributed to Noam Chomsky, The Social Critique, "The whole educational and professional training system is a very elaborate filter which just weeds out people who are too independent and who think for themselves and who don't know how to be submissive and so on. because they're dysfunctional to the institutions. Nikos Kantazakis, the Greek writer, wrote, "True teachers are those who use themselves as bridges over which they invite their students to cross. Then, having facilitated their crossing, joyfully collapse, encouraging them to create their own." And Richard Shaw, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. And from Malala Yousafzai, I Am Malala, the story of the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. Education is education. We should learn everything and then choose which path to follow. Education is neither Eastern nor Western. It is human. And Chris Hedges from Empire of Illusion. We should not forget that the true purpose of education is to make minds, not careers. And finally, Ken Robinson, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. Education needs to be transformed, and the key to this transformation is not to standardize education, but to personalize it, to build achievement on discovering the individual talents of each child, to put students in an environment where they want to learn and where they can naturally discover their true passions. So as a mother of 3 children, aged between 6 to 17, this is a subject that's really close to my heart. And I'm always thinking about how can we make their education the best possible experience for them? And I think crucially in the work that Jenny and I are doing, we often talk about the 3 spaces, the first space being the home, the second one being the place of education, and that third one, the community, or that third extra space. And I think I'm excited today to sort of think about how we can better collaborate with one another, because I essentially feel that is often missing, that link. So yeah, I'm excited to get going. Jenny, would you like to introduce our guests?
Yes, I would. And as she touched on, the last couple of podcasts as well, we've spoken about education. So our theme of knowledge kind of went immediately into education, and then we pulled ourselves back. So we've been waiting to have this conversation today for ages, but we've spoken largely about the environment in which we learn, and then how we learn for the future and in employability. So I love some of the quotes you pulled out, Penny, because it's about learning and how and where. So this is going to get into a bit more technicality, perhaps. So our guest today, we've got Anand Krishnaswamy, is an international award-winning educator, leadership coach, and curriculum innovator with over 20 years of experience across EdTech, pioneering schools, and policy spaces. Anand has trained 1,000+ teachers and coached leaders in nearly 100 schools. A recognised voice in progressive education, he shaped national conversations on the NEP, competency-based education, and Indian knowledge system. Currently the Chief Education Officer at Zista 3E4I, Anand leads the whole school transformation initiatives with focus on excellence and impact. And Phil Hart is an accomplished international educator and currently serves as the head of school at the British International School of Waswav. Over the past 20 years, Phil has lived and worked in diverse educational settings across Australia, the UK, Thailand, Peru, Switzerland, and Poland. This global journey has shaped the deep understanding of how mobility and cultural diversity impact learning communities, and it continues to inform his leadership and education philosophy today. Phil holds a Master's in Educational Leadership and Management, a Master's in Economics, a Bachelor of Teaching, and a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature. His career spans classroom teaching to senior leadership, and he has worked across a wide range of curricula, including Cambridge International, the UK National Curriculum, the IB Framework, Reggio Emilia, and the US Common Core. Beyond academics, Phil is deeply committed to fostering global citizenship, student well-being, and innovative, inclusive learning environments that prepare young people to thrive in a connected and rapidly changing world. And last but not least, James Clanfield is a former deputy and head of academics and pastoral care, turned digital strategist, speaker, and founder of Pillar Digital Marketing. He helps schools and education providers grow with clarity, James combines real educational leadership insight with strategic execution, offering hands-on support across brand messaging, social media, enrollments, and digital content. Through his content, coaching, and agency work, he empowers leaders and educators to communicate with purpose, lead with vision, and show up with confidence in an increasingly competitive space. When he's not building campaigns or attending events, James is homeschooling his 5 kids, running his business remotely from Southeast Asia, and working alongside his wife to help educators thrive beyond the classroom. So, can't wait to get started, and I'll hand back to you, Penny, to start with the questions.
Great. Amazing. Lots of excitement and things to expect today. So, Anand, we're going to start with you today. We spoke previously, and I know that you have a technological background, so you come from the sort of computer system background anyway, and now you're working as a chief education officer with many, many schools in India. How can education systems better prepare students for a future that is increasingly automated and digitized?
Yeah. Before I get to answering the question, one thing you notice, whether one has a background in technology or not, there are rarely anyone who would turn down that question. You can ask that question to anyone on the street and they'd have an opinion about how education must happen in the future. So it's one of those topics, unlike a question in calculus, for which everyone will raise their hand and they'll have an answer to it, right? And I think what that question actually leaves me more with is a whole range of other questions. When we talk about how education should be providing for the future of which we have very little understanding, point is that when we did have a good understanding, did our education serve that future, right? When it was less exponentially changing, did our education actually support that? Would be one of those questions. And what is it of this future that makes us think that we have to rethink our education in the first place? But what also I'm seeing in conversations with a lot of other folks is there is a return to a lot of fundamental questions, things about what is it that makes us human? What is it that is, genuinely human intelligence? Because if you notice, about 30 years ago, people kept saying, oh, machines will do the calculations. But do you really think they can ever make music or they can ever do art, right? And that was sort of the trump card everyone would play to shut the conversation on what machines can do. And then over the past 4 years, nearly every week, those questions are, that cachet of questions is dwindling. They'd say, oh, but can they make music? And then now you have something making music. Oh, that's okay, but can they do painting? Oh, now you have something doing painting. It's like, yeah, but can you strategize and do that's being done as well? So what is led? And people are, I think it falls into 2 camps. There's this one camp that's still trying to differentiate and say what human beings are still competent at, which machines can't do. And that list is really shrinking. And there's this other camp that's saying, you know what, that's fine. At least let's use this as an opportunity to return to some very fundamental questions about what is it that is human in all of this rush of this, this accelerated pace at which we're able to accomplish things. Because that's really what things are going on right now, right? We are able to get an essay done in 30 seconds, which would take 3 hours. It's getting a business plan set up, which would take a week. It's basically an acceleration of sorts that's happening. We're not pausing long. And I think the education of the future needs to grapple with some of these things, the pause, the question of just because you can, should you? And a lot of these kind of things, which will then bring you into a model of thinking about the system, which we haven't. Because if you notice, children are brought into a system where for the first 2-3 years of their life, they've seen the world as a whole, and then it's siloed into 4-5 subjects, 6-7 subjects, and there's a strict lens used for each one of those. And then after 12 to 16 years of schooling, you're not brought back to the wholeness of the world. You're left with those lenses, which is why people can afford to say things like, oh, I'm not a math person. I'm not really a history person. Well, literature is not something that works with me. It's like you're living life and all of this is part of it. So how are you? It's like saying, I'm not really a right thumb person. I'm more of a left thumb person. That doesn't work. We're a whole person, right? But still we can get away with this because schools have uh, allowed for this sort of a silo construct of sorts. And that's what I would just, because one of the things that we were talking about, right? I usually hold in distinction three things. One is education, one is schooling, and one is learning, right? And learning happens irrespective of whether one wants it, doesn't. That keeps going. Education usually is a political construct. It is of that particular state or of that particular domain, which says what is it that would be beneficial for the citizens of that place, keeps changing decade on decade or couple of decades on. And schooling provides for some of that or brings in certain other perspectives and delivers that really. So with these three things laid out as it is, I like to quote a tale that comes from the mythology of this land. The tale goes in this manner. One of the Trinity, that's the creator, instructs a sage, a very wise sage, to put together a grand epic, one of the grand epics that came from this land. It's about 100,000 verses plus, depending on how you count. And the sage replied, of course, couldn't refuse. The sage replies saying, sure, I'll do it, but I need a scribe because I can't have the thinking and the writing happening simultaneously. So I need someone who could keep pace with me. So the creator then identifies a god and says, you should use this particular god. This god will help you in doing the scribing. This god is usually associated with intelligence and wisdom, removing obstacles. So the god's name is Ganesha. So the sage approaches Ganesha and says, this is what the project plan is, and you need to be my scribe. Are we okay with this? To which Ganesha said, that's fine. I don't mind being your scribe. But there's a condition, and the condition is that you cannot pause. You cannot stop narrating the epic. You just have to keep going, because I'm not the kind who stops. And if you stop, I'm going to stop, writing this entire epic. To which the sage replies, saying, sure, I will keep pace. But you cannot proceed to the next verse until you've understood this verse and all the verses that have come up till now. Right? And in that kind of, a cha-cha-cha between the two of them, they compose this entire, this magnificent epic. But what, for me, comes as a parallel from that myth of sorts, or the tale of sorts, is the fact that both of them were very cognizant of the fact that just because something can be done, one doesn't suspend thinking. And I think that's kind of a message that I see now. Just because my machines can do something fast, do I do it, or do I still pause and think? And that sacred pause of sorts is something we need to cultivate, because right now currency is, I ask you what is 5 plus 3 and you tell me it's 8, right? And usually with the students that I work with, I can't tell them that it's wrong. So I would just look at them and I'll go, 8? And you should see sort of the color drain off their face. They're like, oh my God, he's looking like this. It can't be right. Something must be wrong. And this just getting them to think and compose, how did we arrive at it? Was it a mechanical, arrival, or was it something that was well thought through? So I think the education system really needs to connect to a lot of these fundamental questions. How do we get people to stay with the question? How do we get students to pause? How do we get students to look at things beyond the solution to the problem? Yes, I've solved a problem, but in the process, have I created many? Or have I left the system in a much better state than it was in? So these are things that for a lot of people might dismiss it as, oh, this is very philosophical, Anand. This is not going to get you your job. I think going down the line, this is probably what's going to get people their jobs. Because you're going to have most of the other activities done. The machines will take over those. What is going to differentiate, why should I hire a person, are these abilities. Are they going to have the gravity to stay? wait, dwell with the question, see what is pertinent. Was I being distracted? Because in the flurry of providing right answers, you might lose the track of whether you were on the same question or have you now been very cleverly taken onto another track and so on and so forth. So I think it's the uncertainty also, that our discomfort with uncertainty is another problem, right? The whole system of classification that we have is because we're not able to accept things in their uncertainty. So that would be another thing that I feel the educational system would need to look into. One is the pause, the uncertainty, the ability to stay with the question, look into things deeply, dialogue, a significantly vanishing skill that we had, which was just having open dialogues of this sort or of any other sort. I think that's key. Even in our assessment systems, we've started, we pretty much gave up on dialogue. Everything had to be written. It had to be on paper. We would not accept someone's word. We have the phrase, the idiom saying that you take someone's word for it, but it's no longer a word. It is a written piece of text. I think we're returning to a lot of oral, I wouldn't say evidences really. It's I think just getting into the comfort of dialogue, having those necessary dialogues, having those vital dialogues, staying with those, and I think for schools to be able to stay with this sort of thing, it's a massive revisit of what it is that it means to be educated.
I guess that also comes back to the plagiarism as well, doesn't it? That if we're increasingly not going to be known where that work is actually coming from, then maybe the oral, standing there and actually having to share what you know from your brain in that moment is going to become more and more valuable. I mean, I'm intrigued to know from the other guests here if that is the way that it's heading, because I feel like that is the only way you really know what someone's about.
Yeah, true.
What I wanted to ask.
That's an interesting point that you raised there, Penny. As an English teacher, teaching, for example, IGCSE first language, there is an option where students can go down a coursework pathway. And I must admit, I do think that this is a section of the assessment or course structure which will slowly be phased out, or maybe not even so slowly, which is a pity, because the idea behind coursework is to show the students the process of actually compiling that piece, be it creative, descriptive, or persuasive, to go through all of those key components of writing, to provide the feedback, etc. Now that can still happen in lessons, but it means now that the students are going to have to probably perform only in that sort of final test scenario. Which kind of is, it sort of takes us full circle, because that's what we wanted to get away from. We've gone down this coursework where we can actually value the feedback, the teaching, the process, etc. And then technology has kind of come in and just dangled this, sweetened apple right in front of our students, and they don't have the self-control, the awareness, the experience, a whole bunch of, insert word here, to deal with it. I know people or other teachers who've been compiling coursework, and they're literally petrified of sending it off now to the exam boards, saying either A, they really cannot validate the authenticity of the work, or they're pretty sure that it's not 100% authentic. And then what do you do with it? You're in a position as a teacher where you're potentially going to deprive a student of their grade, but more or less through their own willingness to commit plagiarism, as you said, in the first place. So, I mean, going back to some of the points which were raised there, I think the fact that we can get these essays, reports, speeches, all of them done instantaneously, I mean, what makes those things beautiful in the first place is the human imperfection. It's, you type in something and you want to get an AI generated image, half the time we don't like it, or we're kind of, yeah, that's great, but it's great because it's convenient. It's not the best painting or the best image you've ever seen in your life. So I think as teachers, as leaders, we have to really be responsible for driving that cultural change, because cultural changes will happen regardless. Whether you manage them effectively or not is up to you. The challenge, of course, is that even if you do it on a school basis, the fact that we are so interconnected now, what you do in one school is very easily undermined by global standards or that which is happening in the school next door, which our students are automatically chiming into just through likes and connections and other things. So I just thought I'd jump in on that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think there's also that danger, isn't there, about then making that assessment only on that day. And then we've spoken about that as well. You don't always show up on one day. Every day is not the same. So you're not going to be perfect every day. And if that was the day that you happen to have your whole course marked on, how's that for mental health?
Yeah. I think Phil, and extending also on what Anand was saying about the human component of like the student and who they are, but that's also the relationship with the teacher and the leader inside of the classroom, right? It's the pause, the waiting, the empathy that is also encouraged in that space. And it doesn't mean that it is then about the outcome or the assessment, and there's been multiple perspectives on what we believe to be correct when it comes to either examinations or our students based on a grade or a result, or again, there's multiple sort of discussions in that space. But again, if things are instant, we're taking away from the process of thinking that students get to do, the process of that dialogue, that interaction, and that empathy building inside of the classroom. And so, just sort of extending on what Phil was saying around we lose the humanness, and then when he was sort of talking about the thinking process, the learning, what students are actually engaging in, if it's just sort of fast, sure, we can take advantage of that, use that, but where are the gaps that AI or automation or whatever it is can't fill? And that's the person and the connection. And that's what I think we need to really focus in on inside education, inside of learning.
And for me, it's like, what does that information mean to you as the individual? So yes, you can get the instant answer and information, and usually quite broad, or you can, prompt it to give you more depth and everything. But actually, what does that mean to you? Like, where did it come from? What can you say about it? So I wonder if that critical thinking, as you touched on, is going to be so important from an assessment point of view as well, because okay, you've presented this information, but what's your thoughts on it?
There's also another aspect, I think, not just to the critical thinking piece. Unquestionably, right? What does it mean to you? All of those parts are there. One thing that I've been focused, and a lot of the AI governance frameworks and policy frameworks, they're constantly missing out on this particular aspect, which is what I call as the human intelligence patterns. Now, why is AI able to do something is something I think students need to understand. Like, for instance, if I were to now, to all of us, say that Joe walked to the door, stretched himself out, opened the door, and let's say Lana was cycling by. It was bright. And he waved out to Lana and said, "Good. What do you think is the next word?" By the description, without having said anything, most students would say it's a morning. It sounds like he just woke up. Now, that's sort of the probabilistic thing that, for instance, in a very oversimplified way, is what LLMs are doing. Now, for a child and a student to be able to see what in my process did the machine anticipate and thereby give this answer, which I am able to accept as matching the expected answer. I think that kind of a metacognitive thought process is equally critical, because the more we understand our patterns, which are machine implementable, we start seeing patterns of our thought process which are not machine implementable, and then give rise to your prejudices, your conditioning, your biases, all of those things. I think this reflection, not just accepting the tool for what it does, but why is it? What of it is so human-like? Which part of the human process or thinking has it been able to abstract, encapsulate, and then deliver as a feature in this particular software is something I think students should really be made to think about. And that I find missing in all AI policy documents as of today. They're looking at the tooling, they're looking at the design, they're looking at the ethics, they're looking at privacy concerns. all of these things, but not what allowed for these machines to be human-like. That part we're not looking at.
Yeah, I think what concerns me is that also, or concerns me, but there's definitely, there are places in the world, and I know that in India you deal with all kinds of schools, some very open with great resources, some very under-resourced, whether that gap is also going to get bigger. So those who are having the best cutting edge technology and those who don't, how that's going to then play out. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
James, will you go for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this gap would widen, but the gap what it is going to widen at is technology use, and that was always the case, right? Right now, for instance, in a city, in a fairly important city, you would have interactive panel displays up in a classroom. In a school in a remote village, they probably are still using a painted wall as a blackboard, right? They've just painted on top of the wall, and they're using it as a blackboard, right? That's the spectrum. That spectrum, I think, is largely, it's going to get worse, but it will become irrelevant to these people in a sense, because they haven't yet gone to the other stages to even want the newest thing out there, the shiny object that's out there. So if you're going to keep measuring on how much does everyone know with the latest shiny object or the latest tool, then the gap is going to be significant. But if you're going to look at, as what you were saying, Penny, earlier, like foundational literacy and numeracy, I think that gap has to be fixed. And I might be fantastic with ChatGPT, but if I don't have the fundamental literacy and numeracy skills, I'm still going to have issues. So I think that is something that still needs to be addressed. So from a technology use, yes, the gap will always keep widening. That is inevitable. But I think there are other parts of education which we need to look at, which we can either maintain that or narrow that gap, which I hope policymakers look into.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, Anand, was when we spoke last time, you mentioned that there's a severe shortage of qualified, skilled teachers in India. I'm really curious, how can we support the upskilling and the reskilling, helping current teachers to grow and also welcome new educators in? What are your thoughts on that?
So Indian specific, and I think quite a few of the Southeast Asian countries, teaching it's a very peculiar paradox. There's a teacher is revered, like the nearly next to God kind of a thing, but no one wants to be a teacher, right? Because it's not seen as having been successful. It usually precipitates to, oh, I tried being this and I tried being that, or I couldn't be any of these things. So you know what? I decided to be a teacher. It's sort of like a fallback mechanism. So with that kind of an association, it's not yet an aspirational career option for most for the youth. The irony is that we have about 250,000 plus in a particular state itself unemployed youth, but they'd rather be unemployed than be a teacher, which just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you're getting something more than zero. You would get something more than zero every month. Why don't you just be a teacher? No, they'd rather wait and try to figure out and hack into some other kind of a career than be a teacher.
Is there any insight into that mindset? Because I know there's a bit of a archaic thought approach in the UK similar to that, but I don't hear it as a parent. Anyone correct me if they think that's different. But Anand, what is driving that mentality?
It's again, I'm not trying to evade the question. I think it's not as simple as, oh, it's just this one thing which if you tweak the knob on it, it'll be all right. There's a societal thing, as I mentioned, right? There's a societal sort of a dignity associated with it. While on paper, it's very dignified. Nobody wants to do it. The pay scales at the government level are fairly good, but people don't want to do it. You actually think about it, it's one of the only jobs where you get vacation times. You get actually paid vacation times off. If you were to apply it very logically, there is no reason why anyone would say no to But I think there's a lot of a societal thing. It's what is it perceived as? Would I get a good bride? Would I get a good groom? For the women, that's not a problem. For the women, typically it's seen as the safest job to get into because it's respectable. At any point of time, you could segue into your wedding, your marriage. If you have a child, you can get out. And if you get back in, your child also gets free education. There's a lot of these things that seem to make it acceptable. I wouldn't say lucrative yet. It's still acceptable for a woman to get in there. But in a way, I think it's like even nursing, right? Men don't get into nursing as much as women get into nursing. Though it's still a paid job. It's a good paid job. You can do a lot of things. It's something that I think we've not been able to crack. To be able, I think it's really I don't know. Again, I'm just guessing off the top of my head. It's about making or bringing about a artificial paucity of sorts. If we create a notion of, oh, this is rare, this is so coveted, people are dying for this, and you're not going to take anyone just easily, I think then people would want to probably get into it because the money is there, the social status is there, the ease, in a sense. I wouldn't say it's an easy job. It's not supposed to be.
It's just changing the narrative then, ultimately, is what you're saying.
I think so. I would think so, yes.
Be made cool and trendy again in Asia.
Exactly.
Intriguing. Yeah. Okay. Phil, I'd love to move over to you now. We heard before from Jenny when she was doing the bio, what an amazing career you've had, really. I mean, you've been in schools all over the world, and I think that's no doubt been both a privilege and a challenge. From your experience, how do you prepare students to thrive, not only academically, but also in a social context and emotionally, in particular in the world that we've already spoken about today, the technological interconnected world that we're dealing with?
Look, the answer might kind of come across as a little bit surprising, but at the same time, it really ties into this sort of underlying thread of we can't escape our humanity. So I think one of the ways in which in the schools that I've worked at, and now the schools that I've been leading, the way to get students to connect with their emotions is actually to get them to disconnect from this sort of virtual world that they're spending time in. The fact that they can be online all the time, non-stop connection, it doesn't give students any chance to just break. And that links back to Anand's point before about this idea of just taking time to pause. And I think sometimes I would maybe be interested later on in getting some clarification from Anand, but I don't see necessarily just as this kind of AI technology drive as a way of expanding the gap. I think if anything, AI has kind of bridged the gap or even reduced the gap. Having spent time in sort of poorer sections of Peru and Thailand, you see people running around, and yes, it's probably only one device shared by 5 or 10 family children, but they are connected to AI. They're getting access to information that would never have been possible before. So the divide between whether they have the latest iPhone or Android phone, whatever, and whether they've got one which is just about out of date, definitely that will be there. But I do see that we are bridging the gap in terms of the flow of information and the access of information, and therefore maybe a student's ability to really change their reality. So I know I sort of sidetracked or dodged your question there at the beginning, but I just wanted to kind of jump in on that, and maybe we can link back a little bit later.
Yeah, so, and I guess also within the classroom, isn't it? I think that was what I'm sort of referring to within that gap. Yes, you can be online, but are certain schools getting a lot more possibilities, I guess, within their educational programs, I suppose?
Well, look, I mean, the school that I'm at the moment, we have no personal smartphones. That's a policy. We have our computer room. We have iPads, Chromebooks that we can assign to the students. And again, that's very much a kind of luxury that many schools around the world don't have. But the idea behind that is that we consciously wanted the students not to have access to their personal network. So they did have to have a break from those apps and the constant bombardment, even the temptation to swipe on the side of the screen and hide it from the teacher and then quickly jump back. So truth be told, we don't have that. And so to build in social emotional learning, we do it purposely. We've got the sort of traditional house system. We meet in our houses. We have a sort of pastoral approach built into assessment. We build reflection into key aspects of assessment, so the students will get their grades, but there are also opportunities for feedback, a chance to then improve based on the feedback there. We tried to give the students opportunities where they feel that they're extended beyond their discomfort zone. So we quite often like to, the technology is great because it shows you what you want to see. The algorithms are designed to do that, and we are more connected, but we're more culturally segregated as a result because we're only seeing that which we like. So part of our sometimes our assessment would be to argue from an alternate point of view from that which you actually believe in. This idea of empathy, kind of bringing. Yeah. So there's an academic component to it very much, but getting to sort of stand in someone else's shoes develops those. I don't like the term soft skills, but that's sadly what they've been coined. It kind of gives students a chance to dip into those. So you do have to purposely design such opportunities. They don't just happen, sadly. There is a push, for technology. And I like that quote you said at the start. I think it was that we have an obligation to make minds, not only minds, but we have to make minds, not careers. And I think that's essential. And if anything, that would be one of the factors which would encourage me to put the brakes on with AI and with technology. It's that, why are we so sure that this is the way to go? I mean, okay, I don't think that suddenly computers are going to disappear. And I know that there were people, 30 years, 40 years ago who said, oh, these computer things, they're never going to take off. Well,
the irony.
I'm not naive enough to think that that's the case, but the jobs which will be in demand in years to come will be the plumber, the electrician, those sort of personal jobs. So yes, we should embrace technology. I'm not against that, but I'm a little bit concerned for student well-being, for their preparation for the real world, if we just drive them down this path of, we have to do this because it's AI, you have to do this online, etc. So you've got students in our school, and unless the teacher has kind of determined or designed the lesson to use technology as the best possible resource that the students can have, you won't see students in our school with their screens up. You'll see them talking under a tree at break time, or playing football, or looking the teacher in the eye when they're actually delivering an answer, and not hiding behind a screen. So by taking that away from them and disconnecting them, we're actually giving them a chance to build those social, emotional skills, which I think that, again, back to Anand's point, I think that's the aspect which technology hasn't yet mastered. And so we really need to play that as a strength, because that's going to be the kind of key differentiating point between this perfect electronic AI system and the beautiful imperfections and your individual worth as a human.
I like that, how you mentioned the discomfort as well, because we've had on a previous education podcast, we spoke about the need for flexibility and resilience, right? So those are the skills. Like, when I'm out of my comfort zone, what do I do then, right? As in, the computer can't save me then. So when something's gone all wrong, how am I going to think out of the box? How can I deal with it? How can I pick myself up again? So I think that's also ties in really nicely. And that's kind of what you're saying. That's the skills that we really need to make sure we don't lose, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. One of the schools that I worked at in Switzerland, we had the motto there of having the courage to be imperfect. And it's this idea that if you weren't failing, you weren't trying hard enough. And so I think that it is very difficult to communicate that to students, because, again, if they're looking at social media, nobody posts a picture of themselves where they look imperfect. Everything is filtered. Everything is purposefully presented in order to create an image. And then they hear from from a teacher, someone from a generation, that they don't see that kind of connection with them anymore, trying to tell them, no, you should value the human aspect, you should value this, value that. So it's a challenge, and I guess that's again why we're all here having this conversation and conversations all around the world at the same time of what on earth do we do. But there's a little bit of fear in me that the students will only realize too late. That it's like, I'm probably going to misquote the type of experiment, but there's that idea that when you throw the frog into the boiling water, it jumps straight out. But if you sort of turn the heat up slowly, it kind of boils to death and doesn't realize. And I'm a bit afraid that that's our youth today, that they're in something, they don't know it, and they don't have the perception or the skills to get them out of it. And maybe the generation, the older generation, maybe that is our kind of legacy, to point that out to them, to give them the skills, to sort of encourage them to step back.
Does that mean we need to be starting earlier on? I mean, how?
Yeah, I mean, definitely so. I'm devastated when I go to local shopping centers and I see places where there are kids' playgrounds now, and even rather than seeing normal noughts and crosses, there's a computer screen and the kids are touching things and swiping things. I mean, I think it's all kind of part of the myth of what it means to prepare students for, the real world. When I look at what we have, I mean, we need to definitely improve our computer science curriculum and things. But one look at the computer science curriculum, it is outdated. The students, they know far more than us anyway. And the fact that we put a computer screen in a playground and think that it's innovative because they're swiping left or swiping right or up or down or whatever, I mean, it's insane. So I think a lot of it is bells and whistles and noise, just kind of trying to catch on the most current fad without realizing or really reflecting on what fundamental benefits, either in the classroom or to the student's life, might they have by using a device.
It makes me think of like just the looking up and noticing. So I think, because we're always so distracted, is even if we're like crossing the road and we're not really looking what we're doing or what our environment is all about. I mean, it kind of sort of comes back to that really, doesn't it? Like when you said about empathy, we spoke to someone and they do amazing things. They go into schools and ask the students and the teachers to write something that maybe no one knew about them, like their backstory. And suddenly the people within that classroom, the kids suddenly think, oh, I was teasing that kid, but actually he's got a story to tell. And there was another one about it, the teacher suddenly told them, and they would just say, well, that's just Mr. Smith or whoever it was. Actually, no. Who is Mr. Smith and what has Mr. Smith gone through? And I think often that's a bit of it, that we're not so interested in like the details anymore, right? We kind of just sort of...
But even with teachers, I mean, look, the ones that are modeling some of these behaviors are the ones that are doing it themselves. I mean, okay, teachers now can be anywhere from 20 years old to 60 years old or more. So there's going to be quite a spread there. But in staff meetings where you've got the purpose of the meeting might not to be to access something online, but you've got teachers who are in the staff meeting with their screens open and everything. So consciously at the beginning of the meeting, it's like, we don't need computers. Put your screen down. And, I say this to my students, there's no such thing as multitasking. It's one of the world's biggest myths. You have 100% of your attention and you can divide it up how you want, but you can't divide 100% divided by 2 and say you're giving both 100%. So if someone's in a meeting or someone's having a conversation and their phone is out, whatever percentage we allocate to that phone, let's say 40%, they've only got 60% to give somewhere else. And so I think we need to be careful what we are modeling, even as teachers, or to be aware of our own actions, because if we're having a conversation with a student and we've got our screen projected when we're in a lesson and we're worried about finding a file, then that's kind of the same thing as them pulling out their phone while they're trying to have a conversation with us.
Yeah.
So
I think as well as you touched on earlier, Phil, we've got to educate, remind and empower ourselves and younger generations that there is the power of the human mind, and we are all being conditioned because of this fast paced moving technological developments, but we have the control to deal with it and interact with it how we want. And yes, it is full of algorithms that can suck you in, and they do condition you, because we're all part of it. Our lives are on our phones, everything, the communication. But I do believe that, when you were talking, if the spaces are created where you've got that, you don't have that access, and you're like, oh, what if, oh, I need to know that, or how important is it that I know that, and what do I really need to use to go online and research, and where is that? And when this answer is coming back to me, like, actually, how am I using AI, for example, or why am I so addicted to my phone? What is it, and what value does that serve for me? Because we have got that control. It's just that because it's so convenient and adaptable, but we relinquish a lot of it to the device.
Yeah, and there's a big push to drive students into technology, computing, engineering, etc., and not so much of a push anymore into the humanities. Now, of course, my own personal bias as an English teacher comes in now, but one of the best things about doing an arts degree or a humanities degree is the fact that it develops those skills. At the end of the degree, you basically come out saying, I know how to formulate and present an argument, or to critically reflect on something. And okay, that might not transfer to doing an engineering degree and walking out and getting a job straight away, because that is sort of a very linear pathway. But I do think they're the skills that are going to be valued again in years to come, because ironically, the path which we're pushing students down in terms of computing can very easily be the path which is going to be replaced first.
Well, I'd like to ask you, Phil, as well, because obviously you're a head of school. How do you see the role of a school leader now changing? I mean, the time now that you've been in teaching and everything, because we're talking about this different landscape that we're dealing with now. How is that having an effect upon the job that you're doing and where you see that's going? Does it mean less time for you in the classroom, or engage with your students, or?
Look, I always maintain a teaching load, whether it's a smaller one or not, because I figure that's the opportunity for me to keep my sort of finger on the pulse, both for students and for teachers. If I'm asking teachers to do something, I've got to be doing it myself in order to know if it's too much to ask or if it's unreasonable. But also, there's no point me telling teachers what's happening in the classroom if I'm not in the classroom myself. I would say that maybe the point I mentioned earlier about the range of different personalities, the age range, the previous cultural experiences that teachers have, that does make it a little bit challenging, because for some people it's completely fine to come in and have their earpiece in and be, recording notes and everything. And for others, it's a sign of disrespect, or, as I said, that you're not giving your full attention. So where I am now, we have a policy, as I said, of no phones, or no personal phones, etc. And I think that's the landscape which we've decided to create for our students. And so when students come, they know that that's a non-negotiable. Parents know that it's a non-negotiable. And of course, we have many families who come to our school and they absolutely love it. They're like, my students spend so much time on their screen. We're so happy that that's not the default style of learning. At the same time, of course, we have families who come to us and they're like, well, why can we not bring our own device to school? We're living in the caveman times, something like that. And quite frankly, we just say that, look, obviously, the same as you would choose your own car and your own other preferences, that we have our key strengths, we have our strategy, and that's our way of doing things. And so we are perfect for some students, but obviously not for others. What that means as a wider society, who will know? But as a leader, that's the kind of the culture and the policy and the systems and the strategy and all of those things, which are part of daily monitoring. It's definitely not easy, because the default response of students these days is to just, you mentioned, I think, the word dopamine at the start. It's this dopamine hit of, I haven't looked at my phone in 5 minutes, I've been forgotten by the rest of the world. And so we're trying to kind of really draw the line and say, no, the world is here, and that online world will be there, but I don't know, have a conversation with the person sitting next to you.
I love that. I'd love to move on to James now. James, father of 5, respect, homeschooling. We from the beginning, James like, we have to talk about homeschooling. How can we yeah, I mean, how can homeschooling strategies be better integrated, I guess, into schools? What can you see that is missing? Why have you chosen homeschooling? Yeah, especially to meet diverse student needs, I guess, as well.
Yeah. I think what we often get questioned, especially when I was inside of the classroom still and in school leadership, and when either outside of just being around sort of society in and out of different things, or even my students myself, when they found out that I don't send my kids to school, they're like, oh, like you're a school teacher, you're a deputy principal, and you homeschool your children. Like, oh, okay, is it just for primary school? Will you send them to school for secondary? I'm like, no, well, unless one of our children have like, the heart's desire that they want to go to a particular school for a certain reason, then yeah, sure, we would consider it and sort of have a think about it. But yeah, it was, I guess, often our students or my colleagues will be, that's sort of like that cognitive dissonance that you're a teacher, but you homeschool your children. Actually, very interesting. I've found that in my sort of different schools that I've worked at, there've been a lot of teachers that have homeschooled their children, and sort of, different reasons and whatever it might be. But, from day dot that I knew I needed to have a job one day, I wanted to be a school teacher. I loved sort of the whole idea of education and being in education. I didn't have a great education in the sense of experience, the whole bullying thing. I was an arts kid, right? Music, drama, I wanted to do all that sort of stuff. And I went to a typical footy school in Australia. So that it just didn't work out very well. Anyway, but I wanted to get back inside of the classroom because I just wanted to make that impact. And so as I sort of got into my career, I taught in all boys school, and I found it really interesting that year 9 boys hung out with year 9 boys. And I started at that same sort of time teaching this homeschool sort of group after school. They did this arts sort of day, and I found it very interesting that all of these homeschool kids would come together so that they could have this arts day, because they at home doing their English or their maths or whatever their home learning looks like, but these parents sort of created this co-op and they wanted to have a bit of art and a bit of music and drama and dance and all of that sort of stuff. And I, being a music teacher, I said, oh yeah, I'll go help. I didn't know what homeschooling was about at the time, and I saw just how these kids were interacting, and it sort of like inspired me to sort of have a think about these 5-year-old kids. Boys were playing with 11-year-old girls who could then play soccer with the 15-year-old boys and have a conversation. And their parents were also there. And, there was a little bit of a blues. So the older kids would go over and have a nice conversation with the adults and say, look, this is what's happened. And then, so it was this just really beautiful community that, I was observing as maybe someone who was a little bit judgmental of homeschooling initially. My cousins were homeschooled. They were a little bit weird, right? So, but, and we're like, oh, you've just got this stereotype, right? And I don't think it was because of homeschooling, but no, it was anyway. So, and I was just seeing this contrast between what the all boys school that I was teaching in Sydney, and then this homeschool community. And then I happened to meet my wife at this homeschool group. She was doing the same thing, but she was the drama teacher. And so, we met and then we started dating and eventually got married. And it came to the time where, we had to think about what we were doing for our own children. And it was just that interaction that we experienced and saw that sort of was like, I liked what this was about. And I liked sort of the difference that I was seeing, even though I was sort of, trying to climb the leadership ladder very quickly in education, sort of, going to leadership position to leadership and jumping between schools, but at the same time having my own children and then homeschooling them. And I guess going back to your initial question, like what is some of this crossover, or some of these things that work, I guess, that I noticed. And I think, Phil, you were mentioning it before, where the students, their go-to is, their devices, and you like, go have a conversation, go talk to people, go know how to interact. And I was seeing sort of, these in all boys school walk across a stage and couldn't look someone in the eye and couldn't shake their hand because it was more of a societal thing. Like, this is, 10, 15 years ago. So it wasn't the AI thing, and we started to bring devices to school and whatnot, but it was just the intentionality around relationships and etiquette and how do we interact well. And what I saw with the homeschool community, with the parents, is that they were very intentional about being present with their children and knowing, was a good sort of interaction? If it wasn't, how might they be able to deal with that better? Being able to sort of help navigate and lead good relationships through both conflict and sort of positive relationships. And so I guess what that sort of that crossover is like, what are the intentional relationships? And I think it goes back to, Anand, what he was saying, and Phil, like, how are we fostering relationships and in education? And I was sort of having a think about when Phil said, go sit under a tree and have a conversation. It's like the roles of these different spaces that you and Penny and Jenny, you're talking about, they've almost changed in a way, right? So education, school, that was where our source of truth was. That's where we would go. We had our experts, our gurus, whoever they were, be it, societies of generations ago, whether it be in, a home or someone in society or whoever it was. And then it became more the education system. We would send our children to this trusted space for education, for learning. They had the resource, they had the training, they had the skill development. And then now that sort of, and then at home was all right, how do we have some good relationship? What is the well-being component? What are, like, parents sort of asking their children question and being involved in their kids' lives and helping with sort of the day-to-day interactions. And then again, that community space that you talk about, that's the sort of space that's not as connected, but it's the environment that we need for different perspectives and different sort of learning experiences, and to understand how we see the world or make sense of the world outside of our family's context or our family's sort of perspective and training, especially around, this tween age group that you guys focus on. That's where this age group really start to question. Their parents have told them almost everything that their parents know. They need to find another place to get this information from. But the technology and the AI they've got that 24/7. They don't need that at school. I guess what Phil's argument is because they can access that at home. They can access it like that. They can have all the information that they want. So where is now this context, this environment that we're fostering relationship building and how we interact, and how do we sort of grapple with what we know, how we see the world, what is our current worldview, and how we question that. And so I think the homeschool context that I loved is that we partner with our children and we bring learning into everything that we do. We obviously do it for a worldview faith reason personally, but we know a lot of people who homeschool for a philosophy reason, or they maybe have a particular focus on their curriculum or a type of learning or special needs, right? There needs to be this sort of real focused attention provided to their children. So I think where in schools, and what I've noticed the gap when I definitely was inside of the schools, is that there's so much time dedicated to the curriculum, to the learning, and getting these students to get as much as possible to pass these assessments, to pass these exams, and they're missing the opportunity to really grapple with that and make sense of that, and it to be personalized. And so our kids, as much as we sort of say, you're learning this, or this is the book we're doing, or there's definitely their interest and we try to foster that, but it's more along the, how do we journey with them rather than cramming them with information, because they can get information anywhere now. So it's more of those personal skills, those interaction. How do we see the world? How do we make sense of others? And we're now sort of more world schooling. So we do that with culture and food and money and language, and allowing our kids to sort of experience the world, the history, and make sense of that as they go through their learning. So I don't know if I've completely answered your question, but it's just this sort of gap around what my experience of the focus on education in schools to how we fostering actual relationship.
But that seems to be the challenge, is how do you personalize the experience for a child within the school system, I suppose, because if that's what we're sort of saying is the value of being able to be more tuned to the individual. And I think, yeah, and actually, I can definitely see there's that advantage to it. I have to say that from my perspective, someone who's not a homeschooler, my concern was always, what about the socialization of that child? I know you have 5, so to a degree they have as well their own little band going on. But that was always be like, oh, are they not going to be sort of stuck back with the parents and with the adults? They're not developing the same social support, which later becomes, increasingly more important, I suppose. And I mean, I've even seen it with, expats, because, I have also the privilege that I move around the world, but the kids who are often put into these international expat overseas schools are also slightly slower in the development, I would say, in how much freedom they have, how they go out into the world, just because they don't have that environment always at the beginning that they're so familiar with. They haven't grown up with the family and everyone around them. So they are somehow maybe a couple of years, I would say, a little bit slower. So I'd be curious to know how you see that.
Anand, were you going to mention something briefly before? I definitely have some things to chime in on that.
Just for the homeschool, because it's the same question that I get asked, right? Because then I go around training teachers and working with schools, and they're like, oh, so because they want to, I think the logical conclusion is, oh, maybe he's sending his kid to the best of schools.
Yeah.
Right, now that he's seen so many schools. So, and I would like to tell them, no, I don't. And the first question is like, wait, isn't that kind of, sort of hypocritical of sorts? I said, no, I think every system has to be brought to its excellence, right? So I'm working with your system to bring it to its excellence. But homeschooling is me exercising the privilege that I have, because homeschooling is genuinely an act of privilege. It's not up for everybody, right? I don't think it is something that one would prescribe to everybody to go about it, because unless you know what you're doing, you probably end up doing a lot more damage homeschooling your child. Because it's not, and it's also not confining the child. Like, for instance, when we go out into the market and we let our daughter just go out, talk to anyone, right? We're keeping her at watch, but there's that sense of, so the community, the social aspect that you're talking about, Penny, that is easy to address, perhaps in India, because it's very difficult to not meet a person within 30 seconds of your walk, right? It's unlike in any other country. I've been interior, like in the US, or even away from London and UK, and you can go for miles, kilometers, and not meet a person, and that's normal, right? Whereas in India, that's why GPS didn't take off well in India, because we just ask people directions. Who would ever look at your device, right? They'd get you wrong directions. That's a different problem. But then so does GPS. Google takes you to the middle of somewhere and says, So what I was trying to say to James' point was that homeschooling is a privilege, right? And it's not confining the child to the home. It's basically saying that I'm exercising this thing to know how to work with this child. It's usually an experiment of progress, and that's just what I wanted to add to what James was saying. But it's not for everybody to take. It's genuinely.
I appreciate that perspective, Anand, and that clarity. But I love what you both said as well, is that sense of community, and even just getting out in the community and that education going, because you have got that extension of their school, because you are conscious of it, and it's not, it's not going to be as 9 to 3 because of, I can.
And the reality of the world also is that after school, you're not going to always have a school. So you need to anyway know how to interact with people without being provided an ecosystem where you can't justify the interaction. So you can't have 12 years of saying, oh, someone should have put the school for me, or someone should have put my office together, or someone should have put my, the evening club together. That sort of a mentality is also what schools provide, right? Whereas here you figure out, like, I'll talk when I want to, and when I need to, I'll go find out the people I want to talk to.
And that interaction is fantastic. And James, when you said what sort of inspired you was the mix of ages, and I think a lot of schools, and Phil, it'd be good to get your opinion on this or experience, but I know schools often want to create community, be it typically through parent-teacher associations or whatever, but with all due respect, they struggle to make it a priority because there's so much other stuff that needs to be done. And I know that my children, I don't want to say thrive, but their experience is added when they know kids in the older year. So they went to a sports camp in the summer, and there was 2 old kids, a brother and a sister, and they're so like chuffed that they know them, but that it gives them that they know that
belonging.
They've got 9, that belonging. It's part of a wider community, and that you're recognizable. So I do think there's elements of it, and I think that's something that actually, if schools can harness that and do more with that, I think there's so much value there, because it's not just about your classroom or what you're doing in the classroom. It's about how they put all the little years together. Well, what if you don't have good relationships there? And that's where issues can come up. It's not the freedom to go and interact with the older groups, but I wonder if that would help harness sort of relationships and the interpersonal skills, which we've all touched on, are so important.
It's exactly, so I guess it sort of ties in everything that was being said from your initial question about the sort of socialization, Penny, where I think regardless of a school context or a homeschool context, you're going to have students that are either, maybe a little bit awkward or have special needs or whatever it is. We talk about it more happening in the in the homeschool space, but I've been in plenty of schools where it's not unique to a homeschool environment, where my argument is, or my counter to, I guess, your observation, what you've noticed is that the experience of these homeschool kids that I sort of firstly observed was these Year 9 boys that we're talking about. Year 9 boys hung out with Year 9 boys. That was it. That's all they knew how to interact and how to socialize. And sure, maybe there's a Year 10 kid that they were friends or knew and they were on the basketball team, or Year 8 kid, but they started this school at kindy, they, as all boys, went all the way through to Year 12, and that was their cohort, right? Where these homeschool kids were, 5-year-old was playing with the 11 and 15-year-old soccer boys and girls with their parents there, and they knew how to interact and how to manage that. Also, our kids at school are, unless they're doing co-curricular or something, typically they're 9 till 3, where my kids do. Even my eldest 13-year-old does his schooling in a couple hours in the day, and then he has the rest of the day to be creative or to hang out with his friends, or while we're traveling overseas, they're allowed some sort of online time as well. So they've got that, but they've got their sport, and they've got sort of their church groups, and these other sort of students that we were engaging with. Like I was asking the 14, 15, 16-year-olds, like, what do you do? Oh, well, I can go work and start earning a job because everyone else is at school, and I can do it in school hours. And then they are meeting and learning how to do management things, and then they're starting open universities at age 15, 16, getting their degrees before some of these kids have even left school. And so this whole sort of environment around the homeschool community, which interestingly, especially since COVID, has tripled in size, right? So there's definitely a shift in education, and I think mainstream schooling needs to be aware of that and look at what are some of these advantages. And I guess that's prompted your question, Penny, to go, what can we do to foster that some of the advantages of that homeschooling, where, and Andy, you're saying it is a privilege and sometimes it's a sacrifice. You know, my wife stays home to school, and so she doesn't have a job as such. So there's also obviously the sacrifice there, but it is a privilege that not everyone, and it's not for everyone, and definitely recognize that. But how do we then go, all right, it's not just year 9 hanging out with year 9. How are we fostering this community? And I know some schools, I'm not sure your structure, Phil, but you're talking about the house system, right? And some houses go across, you know, K through to 12, rather than going across, you know, just all of year 9.
Or mentoring within the school, right? So
Yeah.
older kids show up and support the younger ones, or show them something. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, yeah, exactly that. So that the house system, for example, that's a great way of getting that whole school experience and getting that interaction. I mean, look, I would say one of the dangers is that we view education as, or schooling as, the process of just getting a degree at the end, or you know, the final grades and enabling university. I think one thing, I know I'm in a minority here regarding the homeschooling point, but I think that is, of course, one danger, that so much of the school experience is not the curriculum. And so even that example, which James is right to point it out, I mean, I would say that's a failure of the school in that point. But those are the challenges that students do need to negotiate, because that's also going to happen when they go to the workplace, and the 5 people who've been sitting in the office and they're all good friends, and you're the 6th member to the group. You're going to have to find a way in, or you're going to get excluded. You know, we don't like people getting punched in the face at the end of a football match because they did something wrong, but that's also something that, you know, physically or at least, you know, in theory could happen. You've got to figure out how to negate those things. So I think that is one of the advantages of attending school, having those positives and negative experiences. But, you know, in the wake of this conversation, those are the things that will remain unchanged. And they're those unscripted learning experiences. So, you know, those group of year 9s walking through the playground, you almost couldn't ask for a better opportunity to learn. Because as a school, you can think, what on earth can we put in place to stop that from happening? Because that's not a very inclusive environment. But then those students, you either get them to reflect, hey, were you being very inclusive there? It didn't look like it. But then you've got that kid who didn't go up to them to play, and you have an opportunity, perhaps in a more sort of, you know, private setting, but to say, look, you know, what could you do to try and engage or to create those opportunities? So I think there's so many aspects of learning, even just in that example, which we can explore. And the only other point, maybe not to sort of redirect the conversation to homeschooling, is that it is still interesting for me that there is this community, either online, but more or less the in-person. I think James is definitely doing the right thing by having his kids get out there and do the sport and the extracurricular afterwards, because although I don't necessarily believe it's a perfect substitute from the school experience, some of the students that transition to our school from homeschooling, it's because their parents didn't almost kind of mandate that was part of the homeschool experience. That yes, we'll home date you at school, but you've got to get out there and get involved. And so we get a lot of students who will kind of come to us, and they're socially unable to negate common experiences and dispute resolution, etc. So put them in a workplace setting in years to come, and they will be the one that you know, failed those negotiations, that are unable to pitch a product, etc. So homeschooling is one thing, but if that's your option, you've got to find suitable alternatives for all of those non-tangible aspects of education.
Just on the other side of the coin, from my experience, I think it's also really important for the schools to create that space and that time to support those social challenges, because I know a lot of people who've considered and taken the homeschooling route because of the experiences their children have had at school. And so I think that it's both camps, for want of a word, have got that.
Yeah, true. And I think it's really about both the camps fighting out on what is the right way to do what it is. See, there are people who would, outside of school, say this is not what schooling should. They're not giving you any real experience. because schooling in general, and it was interesting the way you mentioned it, Jenny, where you said schools find it so difficult to create community. The very fact that the community already was there is something that's missed to them. And the thing is that the schools typically, right, as I keep saying, there's a lot of artificiality to it. They're taking something that already exists, but they're saying, oh, we do it this way in a siloed manner. So if they don't do it that way, they make it organic, they're doing it right. Homeschooling, if they're going to rather keep them just within the children's room and never step out of that place, they're doing it wrong. But if you're sending a child out to sit and negotiate and bargain on the streets of India, you've really gotten a lot of negotiation skills picked up there, right? I've actually had my daughter go and reason out with the flight attendants as to why there was a delay to the flight. And she was standing up there asking them, why was it delayed? Can you please explain to me? And then please explain to me what happens there and all of that stuff. We didn't even bother. We just kept a watch that no one's sort of, pushing her or something of that sort. But she kept at it. So the point is, what do you do? Right? So, which is why I keep saying homeschooling can be done wrong, schooling can be done wrong. Right? There are several instances of schooling done wrong. There are many not so public instances of homeschooling done wrong. But what you need to realize is school is trying to recreate some things that have always been there. And in that, there's an inherent artificiality. It's very difficult to dismiss that one, right? Because we're trying to create science as if it can exist by itself, or math as if it exists, rather than saying,
but maybe it's also the schools are now having to do too much sometimes, I also think. And that returns to like how we've said, like, James, you said the school was where you went to, I think it was James, where you went to have your education, and then that was that, and then you went home or whatever. And now there's this blurring of the edges. So what is the parents' role? What is the role of the community? What is the role of the school? We've got more SEND children. We've got more issues. We've got all this other stuff, mental health. And then, I'm thinking everything's covered by like internet and AI and everything all over the top of that, like a big tent. So yeah, I think that is what it's about. Like, it's changed. So, and then at the same time, we want them to change maybe the space. We're saying to schools, they need to be outside more, and they need to be having, so I think there's just this huge responsibility that, like, we want to support our youth in so many ways, but how can we do it, and how can we help each other? And that seems like a huge thing to grapple with.
It's just one thing I'd like to sort of slide in here, because it's a lot of the narratives that we have allowed ourselves to be sold on. You see, technology exists. GPS is equally ubiquitous, but we don't teach GPS in school. Biometric systems are equally ubiquitous. We are not teaching biometric systems in school. To have been sold on the narrative that AI is going to become ubiquitous, so it has to be taught in school, is something that frankly doesn't make sense to me, even though I am a person from the computer science background. I should be actually going, yay, for everything that people say, right? Like, let's teach them more keyboards and more mice, and this and that. No, I don't see the need. See, when the wheel, and I know none of us were there when it happened, when the wheel was invented, they didn't change education because of that, even though the wheel took you downhill faster, right? I think there is this narrative that we're being sold on, and no one's questioning the narrative. Say that, wait a second, kids, like how Phil said, and I think all of us agree with it, right? Kids are very quick at learning the tools by themselves, and they're very quick at even mastering them way ahead of the adults, if the adults could ever get to that point. Yet we feel that we have to teach them tools. We have to teach them any of these things. We have to teach them the jargon of how to operate them. I think that narrative really needs to be questioned. And that's why I sort of go back to what I was saying. There are a lot of fundamental questions we need to return to. Not only about, wait a second, what are the narratives we are buying and we have accepted and we are refusing to question? But even things like, like in the sort of the Eastern philosophy, you had these Zen koans and things of that sort, right? Where you'd ask a question, you're supposed to just be with it. There's no logical answer. That sort of an education is pretty much absent today. We're following the linear path because it seems to be easy to see and predict, and you know where it is going to go. Why are we being sold on these narratives is something I think as educators we need to question. The very thing that you have to be taught a math and have to be taught this physics and this, versus getting it from the students or getting it from the child. And can the teacher then orchestrate? Because then your question of making it personal automatically is taken care of because it comes from the child and not from the textbook. So all of our theories, all of our the curricula, the boards, what have you, they're top down rather than bottom up. And the gardener never gives what he or she has decided to the plant. They work with what the plant needs, right? I think that is sort of being missed in the entire conversation, where we still say, okay, we want to personalize, but top-down personalize, rather than bottom-up personalize, which is something I just want to put in front of all of us.
I think you're right. And Phil, I'd love to hear what you think, before we get to our tween question about
Yeah,
that.
well, I think that there's parents are more and more offsetting, or there's a somewhat trend to offset parenting to schools, and I think that's basically what Ginny was saying there. So I think it really highlights how important the choice of school is, if that is in fact something that parents are going to either intentionally or unintentionally be doing. It does mean that schools need to be very clear with their product offer and what they intend to actually present to their students. But if schools start to become proxy parents, then I guess it's really important that parents do the due diligence and make sure that they're sending their students or their children to the right school. So yes, well, I think education in general is a privilege, but then yes, we have the privilege then of traditional schooling, online schooling, etc., or blended schooling, all of these different options. But it shows that parents have to be more mindful and more critical when choosing the school that they choose for their children.
Absolutely. All right. Well, on that note, I would like to take us to our tween question today. And that question is, why can't we help decide what we learn in school too? We're in the classroom every day, but most of the time we don't get to help decide what's taught. And I'll ask that to you, Phil, first of all.
Oh, well, okay. So maybe I'm going to be a little bit unpopular here, but I'll start it with that, and then we can branch off from my unpopular statement. I don't think that students really should have the right to, or have too much influence in what they're taught. I do think that teachers have an obligation to present learning in a manner that reflects an understanding of the students, their interests, their way of learning, etc. So this is definitely not a kind of differentiation debate. That definitely should be happening. The reason why I don't think students should really direct the learning, at least maybe we need to discuss from which point or from where we want them to start. I mean, having some input or designing the entire process are probably two different questions. But I think we need to remember, I mean, are we talking about students in year 2? Are we talking about students just about to graduate? So there's probably a wider discussion even within that. But the reason that they're coming for education, in addition to all those social emotional benefits that I've touched on, is because they don't know something. So if you open up the flexibility of the curriculum and the lesson design and everything too much, you're getting those that don't know something to tell you what they want to learn. Now, okay, you might say that that's part of metacognition, or that's part of the process. If we know we don't know, we can follow that train of thought and we'll get to the final point because we've asked all our leading questions and we've worked our way down that ladder. I don't believe that that's necessarily the case. I think that you might get there in some cases, but I think that if we just handed over the lesson or the learning design to students, then we would just steer off course. So I'm going to put that out there, and everyone can.
Makes me think of like democracy in general, right? You're going to sometimes have to do the stuff, you're going to have to engage with other things. You should engage with other things that you might not potentially want to do, or not potentially in the first instance like, but you might, exactly as you say, learn something from that.
Yeah. So I think degrees of choice would be key. That would be something that I would definitely look into. But I think that, the teacher is still the adult in the room, and I mean, we cannot guarantee that they're always, ethically sound, that they're going to behave in the right way and do all of these things. But that's part of also good recruiting. So if you put the right person in the classroom, you're trusting that they are the right person. So let's kind of guide them, or allow them to guide the learning from there.
Do you think they ought to get one day a week, like one lesson a week, where they get to decide what they're going to do? Or are you saying no, even that would be too much?
I mean, look, I think that they could, but even what I would say is that a typical lesson or a unit of work would be, okay, these are the non-negotiables that we need to learn in this particular area. You can't just say to someone that you can choose, if we're preparing students who want to be engineers, they can't decide whether they want to learn theory of relativity or gravity or something. There has to be things which we're presenting to them at the point where they know what they should, or at least that kind of foundational knowledge. Then I think that they could embark on a project or something of their own choosing, or demonstrate their learning in their own way. But I don't think students, regardless of their age, upon reflection while I'm speaking, I don't think they have the perception, the experience, the maturity to be designing their school experience, let's say.
Thank you. And Anand, what would you say?
I was just going to say, Penny, it's from Phil's answer as well, it's about the facilitation of it. We're talking about a standard school system, classroom setting where you've got 15 to 30 children. That's the reality, and the facilitation of it would be quite tricky.
True.
So,
yeah.
No, I was wondering whether James would like to go first. I think
saving the best for last.
Sure. Yes, so I've probably changed my position on this a few times, but most recently, so obviously being a head of curriculum, I was very much about sort of ensuring that my teachers, my staff were meeting outcomes. Did they sort of indicative hours? There's sort of all these certain requirements by curriculum boards, education boards, and ultimately government. And so I guess the question of, why can't we decide what we learn? All of it is sort of mandated, dictated from a educational sort of standard. And there are certain codes, without getting into too much of the technicalities of it, there's certain things that the education boards and the government, as it were, have said that these are required for different stages or different grades or different age levels. So with that in mind, that is why often teachers struggle to get through all of the curriculum and rush through it, sadly. And that's why I sort of question the effectiveness of our sort of some schools, not all, and some teaching and some courses, and how much students can engage, and especially nowadays where what you're saying before, Penny, is like, now there's also the well-being, the social and emotional learning, we need to do co-curricular, we need to sort of care for all of these sorts of things. There's just so much extra that is sort of on teachers on top of the curriculum. But yeah, from that sort of discussion, I think it's very much sort of, this is what we in Australia have determined, or what the IB has determined, or what these different sort of curriculum boards per country, per region sort of determine. And it is very much, I think, and Andy, you were saying it before, it is that sort of top-down approach to learning. We've decided that this is what's required, expected. Students should have a knowledge of at least these things. To what capacity is how much they can sort of take in within a curriculum year or whatever it might be. Where I think that as much as we try to throw words out there like, personalized learning or student-first learning, I don't think that schools do that well these days, or we have the opportunity to do that well because of what is required or sort of mandated from that curriculum perspective. So if who's in charge, right? So it's the government, the education authority is in charge, and so that's why, unfortunately, it can never be student sort of focused learning. We one of our campuses, we used to do sort of I keep talking about Year 9 boys. We took the Year 9 boys away for 6 months, away from the school, away from, and we sort of did this like outdoor experience. And I was the head of curriculum there, and we just threw out one of the curriculum and we put in PBL, so project-based learning, and it was completely student-driven. They chose their project, they chose which curriculum it could align with, or multiple curriculums could align with, and we did it once a week for 3 hours, and they could do it in their extra time if they wanted to. And it was the only subject that the boys just every week could not wait for. They wanted to get to it. They were super engaged, and they were making the learning connections, the curriculum connections themselves, because they knew that they had full autonomy from the planning, the very beginning of what it was, that they wanted to justify, oh yeah, this connects to maths here and connects to geography here and history here. So this is, we're learning, doing this project of building a beehive or whatever they decided for it to be. And that sort of like, that's when I saw, student first learning in the school setting. And our kids, for our own kids that we homeschool, our basis is literacy, numeracy. That is absolute minimum that we do. And then everything on top of that is learning through experience, whether we're doing experiments or we're going and seeing castles or temples or historic locations around, firstly Europe and now Southeast Asia. So we turn that into learning. And then my son enjoys cooking, he enjoys this. So then we do turn the curriculum, as it were, or flip it on its head to go, all right, where do our kids enjoy? Where can they excel? And we have sort of, I'm a director of a homeschool group, online group, and that's what we try to create for our kids. And so we go do the student first sort of experience. What are they voting on? What would they be wanting to interested in? And then it's our role as the online experts or facilitators, educators in that setting to then make the curriculum links for the families if they want to register and do the right thing by the government and all that sort of stuff in homeschooling their kids. But we've taken sort of the votes from the kids, as it were. Then we build curriculum from there and make curriculum links and say, hey, can connect to Australian curriculum in this way. So my argument is I don't think we can do it in mainstream schooling because of the government mandates what they want. And without going into conspiracy or anything like that, it has nothing to do with that. That's just what they've chosen. Is that what these kids need to learn at these sort of ages? And there is research behind certain things. However, I think if we want that student first learning where it really is about the kids, and I would argue that's important because half the things I learned at school, I don't remember them nor use them, and I'm inside classroom every single day. So these are arguments for, do we need to know everything that the curriculum mandates currently? Anyway, I'll leave it there, and you can summarize it all.
Yeah, I think we need a whole new podcast on curriculum changes because that's already another whole one for another day.
So here's how I would look at it, right? So a short answer to the question: is it doable? Yes, it is. It's very much doable, right? The next set of questions would essentially be around how would you go about doing it, right? To the tween that would be asking me. Firstly, I think because we need to share certain things that we could work with, the foundational literacy and numeracy has to be in place. So you can't come in to say that we don't want to do that now and we'll pick it later on. Let's just start with some things so that we have a common language. But beyond that, so let's look at a class of 30. And even in the misunderstood version of differentiation, where a teacher might think that they need to have an IEP per child, which is ridiculous. But you can't have 30 IEPs. A teacher cannot handle 30. Let's say there are 30 students in the class, right? You wouldn't be doing that. So now imagine, and I'm asking this to the tween, you want to do something, and every single person in the class wants to do something different. How do you see that working with a teacher or even a team of teachers, right? So then what I would put back to as part of the negotiation with the tween would be, would all of you like to sit together and come back with something that covers a lot of your interests? Now, this done, it's up to me as the teacher to be able to tie this with the learning outcomes and the various other, the particular stipulations that are there as part of the curriculum. which means I need to be trained wide enough to be pretty much be a polymath, to be able to look at all of this and say, how can I connect anything to these learning outcomes, which is not commonly done. I don't think it's done at all. I'm just going to be a little cautious and say it's not commonly done. Teachers are not trained to do that. For instance, I've actually done this in a history class where a child asked me, is history all about wars and kings and the queens and who got beheaded and who didn't? And I said, unfortunately, not. There were a lot of other things happening. It's because, if you study history, it looks like people are just sort of waiting to either get onto a guillotine or behind a cannon or, riding a horse. And that's all that people were doing back then. And it wasn't. There were some people who were just cooking, or were lying drunk under a tree. Those things were happening too. So I said, okay, so what would you like to study? And they said, they couldn't think of something that could be studied in history. I said, let's just take your water bottle. Would you like to study the history of a water bottle and how water carriage happened all the way from back in water containers and all of that stuff, from gourds that were dried and used as that to leather bags to much of that stuff and so on, all the way up to metal containers and how that happened. And they said, oh, this water bottle has a history. And to them, that just blew their mind that it is possible. There was no kings involved in this, or there were no queens or any such, no flags or any of that stuff. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to have a teacher who's trained enough to take anything. The same thing I would ask, like when I'm interviewing math teachers, I'd say, you walk across the street in India, there's definitely going to be a garbage pile somewhere, right? So can you stand in front of the pile of garbage and teach someone probability? And you'd be surprised to see a lot of math teachers going, and some of them will attempt, and it turns out to be a conversation with statistics. And I'm saying, no, statistics is not probability. We're confusing the two. Can you take the pile of garbage and teach probability? Now, I'm saying you need to have teachers trained to be able to do this. Can I take a dog that was walking by and then teach science and history and math and all of that, just looking at that puppy squealing all the way? Now, as I said, that's a very different degree of training that a teacher needs to have. Given that we already have a shortage, and the numbers you quoted were staggering, 44 million, if you're going to ask them to do this, it's probably going to be the entire population as the shortage of teachers that you're going to have. So the reality of this is where we start negotiating, and I think we would automatically arrive at something that's not as rigid as the curriculum stipulation, but not as flexible as anyone picks anything. So I think with the tween, we'd arrive at a point where we'd say that, okay, what I want to teach you and I want you to appreciate is how quantities can assemble in patterns, and we'll study algebra in the process. But we won't use the same f of x and g of x and all of that stuff. We'll use, assembly of, say, seeds or animals or herds of things that we see outside our window. We'd use something of that sort. So I think we could come to a common point, and it is possible for the tween to realize that if you're doing mandated education, right, there would be a need for negotiation for how do we go about it. It is doable. Again, I want the tween to know that it is doable. It is very, very doable. It's just a problem of population.
Maybe that swings back round again about how you find teachers or make the profession trendy again or whatever else. If you're changing what is expected of you as a teacher, so you've got more freedom maybe to do what you want with your students or whatever, maybe that's a way of making it more exciting. And I was just thinking, just then it'd be quite cool to sort of say as well to the tween, why don't you get up and do a lesson and try it out and
they should get
see
that
how
experience.
easy or how difficult that might be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of today's episode on education strategy. It's quite clear that education is no longer just about what we know. It's about how we think, how we adapt, and how we care. Whether you're a teacher, a student, a parent, or a policymaker, we all have a role to play in shaping what comes next. We hope that this conversation has sparked some new questions and perspectives for you, maybe even made you rethink what education should look like in your part of the world. Thanks to our brilliant guests today, Anand, James, and Phil, for their insights and for the work they do every day to move education forward. And thank you as well, listeners, for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who cares about the future of education. Until the next time, take care of yourself, stay curious, and keep informing those perspectives.